What if you were just one skill away from landing your dream job, dream clients, or dream career? That's what I want to talk about in today's episode. So grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. If you could identify one skill that could change the course of your career, what would it be? Today I want to give you 3 tips on how you can upskill yourself and accelerate the prospects of your professional personal brand. There is research that suggests that for 7 million workers in the UK, they lack the skills that will be necessary for them to do their jobs by 2035. This comes from the National Foundation of Educational Research. And this indicates that there is a need for upskilling ourselves, a need for us to constantly be keeping up with an ever-evolving industry and an environment around us. I feel like there is often a lot of attention that is given to various topics like pay gaps, for example, but maybe not enough attention given to conversations like skill gaps and what you can do in that space to also accelerate the prospects of your careers. Sometimes when it comes to our career development, we can focus a lot on what that lucky break might be, finally landing that dream job or dream client out of potentially nowhere and just getting that breakthrough that we have been hoping for. But what if you actually took control of the situation more and you actually looked inwards to try and set up the necessary steps to position yourself for that potential desired career, customer, dream job that you're actually looking for. So as I talk about a lot on this channel, this is about developing a growth mindset and asking yourself what you can actually do to supercharge your skills and your capabilities. This leads me back to a concept that really resonated with me, which I love to also reference on this channel. And this was something that I learned in Stephen Bartlett's book, Diary of a CEO, where he talks about these 5 buckets that we have. And the 5 buckets that he identifies are your knowledge, your skills, your network, your resources, and your reputation. And really importantly, these 5 buckets are interconnected. So you have to be able to fill a bucket first before you can pour into the next bucket. And importantly, what differentiates the first 2 buckets, which is your knowledge and your skills, from the rest of the buckets, your network, your resources, and your reputation, is that your knowledge and your skills are within your control. They are something that cannot be taken away from you easily. They're not as susceptible to external forces when compared to the other 3 buckets, which gives you a really amazing opportunity to be able to focus on those things. I've talked a lot previously about how you can build your knowledge and establish learning habits in your daily routine, for example, like reading regularly. But what is more important is also then converting that knowledge into your skills and actually applying that knowledge in a practical way. And I love this quote from the book that Bartlett shares when he says, "Those who hoard gold have riches for a moment. Those who hoard knowledge and skills have riches for a lifetime." So let's apply this to your own work experience. Maybe you've had the experience of working with that colleague or someone in your industry who seems to be constantly upskilling themselves. They're always steps ahead of the competition. They're always future focused and considering what it is that the market is actually demanding from them. And they're not afraid to take those steps to actually develop skills that may not be in their comfort zone, that weren't necessarily things that they ever thought that they would be trying to learn. What I would challenge you to think about as well when it comes to your professional personal brand is really making this more personal. And ask yourself if you really got granular with what you could do to upskill yourself. What could that skill be? For example, is it writing? Is it speaking? Is there a particular technical skill that you haven't ever mastered but you've watched your teammates and your colleagues or other people in your industry do this and you maybe assumed that it wasn't ever something that you would do, but you could actually challenge yourself to do that? What would that skill be if you were to identify that? And try and think of an area that could potentially change the trajectory of your career. And this leads me into tip number 1. Tip number 1 is clearly to identify your skills gap. When you're doing this and you picture your dream job, dream client, dream career, put yourself into their mind frame and ask yourself what skills they are looking for. What is the feedback that you have already gotten from the market that could be missing in your skill set? And don't just think about the current market. Think about where the future of your industry and your marketplace is going. What are the trends that are only going to accelerate in your professional sphere moving forward that you need to be able to keep up with? Identify what those things are and try and do research in particular areas to really get ahead of not just what is happening now, but the future of your industry. You want to future-proof your professional personal brand and the skills that you have to offer the marketplace. And this leads me to a quote that I loved in a book called Future You by Frances Valentine, where she says, let's take an employee who has worked in the same organization for 5 years. If you took a blank piece of paper and pen and listed all of the ideal skills, capabilities, attributes needed for their role, would the current employee still meet the criteria if their job was advertised today? So that is a really great place to start. Think about your current role and if you actually meet the skills that your current employer or your current clients would be demanding for you at this present time? Or are there obvious gaps in the skills and capabilities that you have, even aligned to your current job description? Or while you have been in a particular role or working in a particular industry, what has changed that you haven't been able to keep up with? Or was maybe that gap in your resume that was fine at the time but is now something that you need to address? Outside of the education that you may get formally, actually ask yourself what the real world industry is doing. I have a blog, a YouTube channel, a podcast, and I regularly publish on LinkedIn. If you had asked me if that is what I thought I would be doing many years ago at the start of my career, I certainly would not have believed you, but I'm trying to move with where the industry is going. And I'm certainly not any sort of star on any of those platforms, but what is more important to me and why I actually started to develop a presence on those platforms is because I wanted to learn the skills attributed to doing those things. I wanted to learn how to make videos. I had always overseen video as a part of my role, but it is one thing to be overseeing video and it's another to be able to understand some of the technical intricacies of it. Now, of course, if you are in a more senior role, you absolutely don't need to have every skill that your team has. This is something that the best managers know how to delegate. Your team is able to fulfill the skills that you don't necessarily have. But it's also really nice to have a curiosity about particular areas that also have alignment with your professional goals and your professional development needs as well. I also really doubled down on my writing. This was something that I was responsible for as a part of all of my career, but I really wanted to do more and more of it. I wanted to be able to write every day, to be able to develop that skill at a supercharged level compared to what I was doing on a day-to-day basis at my work, which was already pretty significant. But when you really decide to hone in on what that skill will be, you will start to see all of the levels that that particular skill can progress to. You'll start to uncover all of those things that you didn't even realize that you didn't know. So identify what your skill gap is and hone in on that one particular skill that could make all of the difference. That leads me to tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to build an upskill plan. This is the bridge that is going to get you from your current state to your desired future state for your professional personal brand, or what that particular skill is that you want to be able to develop further for the sake of where you want to be in your career. It doesn't always need to be something fancy. It doesn't need to be that one-off development day that you go to for a conference or a workshop. It doesn't need to, at the other end, be that degree that you get or that certificate. It can sometimes just be how you are focusing in on that skill every single day and teaching yourself how you can develop that skill every day in a really practical way. This was an idea that resonated with me a lot when I read Austin Keelong's book, Show Your Work. And he highlights something that I talk about a lot on this channel, which is a popular story related to Jerry Seinfeld, when an aspiring comedian asked him for advice, and Jerry Seinfeld suggested that if writing is the most important skill that is related to that particular industry, then he needed to be writing every day. And he suggested that he gets a big calendar with all of the days in the year and he puts it up in his office or his room, and every day that he writes, he grabs a red pen and he crosses out that day. And then he starts to build a chain. And the chain is something that you then become attached to because you don't want to break that chain. So your professional development plan related to that skill that you want to develop can be as easy as identifying that thing that you could do every day. There is also a way that you can take your skill development to the next level, which is my tip number 3, and that is to engage in painful practice. You've probably already heard about the 10,000 hour rule. It was a concept that was based on research by Anders Ericsson. He worked with chess players, athletes, musicians, and more, and identified that it would take 10,000 hours to be able to master a particular skill. But there's an aspect of his research that often gets left out of the more generalized conversation around the 10,000 hour rule, and that is the idea of deliberate practice. It's actually not just enough to show up at your practice every single day. You need to actually be deliberate about what it is that you are working on. So your practice shouldn't just be randomized, it should actually be really considered to hone in on particular areas. In the book, The Art of Work, I loved how Jeff Goins took this one step further, and he talked about this concept of painful practice, because work is actually work after all. And we are often told that if you find what you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. But Goins reminds us that practice should be painful. So if you think about, for example, if you exercise or if you go to the gym and you want to work on particular things, you are usually trying to stress and strain those muscles past a particular comfort zone to get to where it is that you want to be. So your painful practice related to your skills should actually feel the same. They shouldn't feel comfortable like you aren't necessarily working a day in your life, and not like you are 100% just loving what you do. There should be an aspect of it that feels challenging, that is pushing that comfort zone, so that you can then experience the growth that is available to you beyond that comfort zone. A way that I really like to apply this concept of deliberate practice is to think about the 1% rule, which is something that I heard from Ali Abdaal when he references his strategy for producing videos and what he teaches to his students as well. He says that he just focuses on being 1% better with each video. So just ask yourself what that 1% is that you could focus on the next time that you are practicing that particular skill. Or if you do want to think more broadly than that, develop a plan that helps you to focus in on different aspects of that skill that you are trying to develop, instead of just randomly showing up and feeling like showing up is all you need to do. Because over time, that is what is going to have the most impact on the professional potential of your personal brand in the future. Jeff Goins says, researchers have argued that what we used to think of as natural talent is in fact the result of good old-fashioned practice. If you want to learn more about how you can reinvent your career, then check out my previous episode on this topic. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.